It's been nearly 2 weeks since the 55-year-old mother from Michigan, Lynette Hooker, was last seen. And now there's new evidence that could point to the fact she never went missing in the water.
I think an interesting development has taken place today. There's been some reports from the ground in that Elbow Cay that the searchers, both from the Royal Bahamian Police Force as well as the U.S. Coast Guard, do not believe that Lynette is in the Sea of Abaco. That the depth there is too shallow, and that their search is being conducted extensively on land.
How likely is that? What sort of search does that look like at this point in time? I have some very special guests to help break it all down, including the latest interview with Brian Hooker. Yeah, Brian Hooker reported his wife Lynette missing on Saturday, September 4th, 2026. He says that the two went to dinner. They were getting back to their larger vessel on a dinghy. The weather was bad. She fell overboard. She took the key. He had to report her missing several hours later. And then he was detained by police. He was questioned for several hours. When he was released and not charged, he also spoke to the media, gave a few interviews, professing his love for his wife, saying that he would never leave the Bahamas until he found her. And then suddenly he decides to flee the Bahamas. So what is he not saying? We dive into the case with some very special experts. First off, I have an expert that specializes in missing persons cases, not only domestically, but abroad. He helps track down people that are taken or missing in other countries. So he's going to break down the case evidence as it stands right now. And then I have a very special guest to help deal with the realization that this might be a recovery effort and Lynette might not be on this earth, but her body, where is it? And what possible evidence could be on her body? So I have a very special guest to help break all that down as well. But first, do me a favor, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and please share this episode with a friend. Let's help bring the true crime family back together. Now, the case of missing Lynette Hooker. So here to help break it all down, we have Brian Fitzgibbons, Director of Operations at USPA Nationwide Security, an expert in security, not only locating people domestically, but abroad, extraction of people. And, you really specialize in missing people around the world. And that's the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this case. Plus, you're a veteran, and thank you for your service. Thank you for being here. I mean, there's been so many developments with this case of Lynette Hooker. We are approaching the 2-week mark. So what are your thoughts overall right now with the headlines?
Yeah, hey, a lot of new breaking developments. First and foremost, Brian Hooker has been released after that statutory deadline was met in the Bahamian courts. So I think knowing that at least they didn't have enough probable cause with the magistrate to keep him in custody is very telling at where they're at in this investigation.
Yeah, do you think that he could be required to come back to the Bahamas? Is it unusual that someone doesn't have to stay on premises and kind of turn over their passport?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that he was released by no means indicates that this investigation is over. Just as recently as 8-9 hours ago today, videos were coming from reporters in the Bahamas of U.S. Coast Guard canine teams searching around that Elbow Cay area. So this investigation is certainly not over and may indeed be heating up.
And another big headline has been, okay, so he spoke to the media after he was released. He was in custody a couple days and he did numerous interviews over several hours. He lawyered up right away, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're not saying that there is. And he's maintained his innocence. But, he was saying that he was going to stay in the Bahamas. And I wondered what you thought about the interviews that he did, and I'm going to play you some clips and get your reaction on the backside.
In 10 days. It's been a long time. I don't think I've ever been apart from her. In 25 years, for this long, she wouldn't stop, and I'm not going to stop.
What are your thoughts in just how he's carrying himself and conducting himself in the interview?
Yeah, I mean, hey, listen, I'm not an expert body language analyst, but what I will say is, it always baffles me when defendants or suspects in cases like this get in front of cameras. I know that there's a tremendous amount of pressure for him to give some kind of statement, but I think at this point, I don't know if it's helping his defense in any way to provide any of these statements. And one thing that I will add is it could only hurt him with the things he's saying. And it does this fly in the face of, other emotions he's shown over time with his family. Is this out of character for him, or is this in character? We don't have the answers to those questions, but I don't see how these media interviews benefit him in any way.
He apparently did a couple interviews, including CBS News and NBC and a few others. I want to play you what the reporter said before they played a clip on CBS Morning News, and then get your reaction to this.
We spoke to him, but we only spoke to him for about 6 minutes before his attorney said that he couldn't get into certain aspects of the investigation. Here is some of the interview, and we'll talk about it on the other end.
I want to. My goal is to go back and speak with the Hopetown Fire and Rescue volunteers, the search and rescue volunteers. They have been, I believe, still looking whenever they can, but even while I have been detained by the Royal Bahamian Police Department. I was speaking with a volunteer the day that I was detained to go out on one of their boats. They were going to take off work and take me searching some more areas. I won't be able to stop looking.
You want to keep looking for Lynette?
I'm going to need somebody with more authority to tell me to stop.
Yeah, okay.
You explain to me. You've seen the attention this case has had.
And more like I've heard about it. I have not looked at the news or any social media since the day before the accident, because my sister flew in to support me and said it's getting terrible out there. And then I went to dinner one night after searching, and I was approached by a freelance reporter, and I began to think that it was going to be terrible.
Okay, first off, I brought this up in another episode after watching this, and it sticks out to me even more. I've been around a lot of missing persons cases. Some were abductions, some were, people that have walked away from their home. There's been different circumstances, but the family, it's always constant. The family and the loved ones are always beside themselves, and sometimes they're not showering, sometimes they're not eating. This man went to a restaurant to that. It just stood out to me. You've dealt with a lot of missing persons cases. What's your take?
Yeah, you're spot on. In those, especially initial weeks, right? Hours feel like days, days feel like months for these families that are undergoing that intense pressure. And in the juxtaposition of, planning out media interviews And I want to back up and say, let's go right back to the beginning. You know, he launched out a well-worded media statement on his Facebook page early on that seemed to want to be shaping the narrative. And I think what you're seeing in these media interviews, and probably why he cut it short, is some of the best people in the business at asking questions in almost like an interrogation style are folks like you, Matt, that are in the media, right? That are investigative journalists. And some of those pointed questions probably shut that interview right down because he couldn't control the narrative anymore and still answer those questions in a straightforward fashion. So, you know, knee-jerk reaction off of that. I think he wants to show the public this emotion, and that's what he tried to have come across there. You know, whether that lands or not, I'd say it probably didn't land because those key questions are not being answered.
Well, you know, what access would he have to information if he was detained over those few days? And how much of a part of the search could he be after he was released? Because we know that he's already left. He's back in the States, but he initially said he wasn't going to leave because she would never leave if he was missing. And he, you know, sung that song to the media. But what would his options be? How much information could he learn? How helpful could he be?
Well, you know, we have to keep in mind there were a number of days, and I'm not perfect with the timeline here, but there were a number of days before he was detained that he would have had. Yeah. So, all right. So we have almost 3 days that he was, you know, had access to a cell phone, had access to this story was going out like wildfire to the point that he was communicating through Facebook Messenger on some of those text messages have been revealed saying, hey, I'm sure you've seen these reports, right? So we know he was aware of the reports, which contradicts what he's saying in this interview. So he's well aware and was well aware prior to going into custody that this story about Lynette's disappearance had made national news, international news.
So where are we with the search, do you think? It's almost been 2 weeks. We have someone that went missing in the water, regardless if it was an accident or not. But, you know, time is running out to find her, I would think, in that body of water where there's predators, there's sharks and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think an interesting development has taken place today. There's been some reports from the ground in that Elbow Cay that the searchers, both from the Royal Bahamian Police Force as well as the U.S. Coast Guard, did not believe that Lynette is in the Sea of Abaco, that the depth there is too shallow, and that their search is being conducted extensively on land. So, you know, hey, that's a key piece of information for us, right? That the searchers themselves are at least indicating to media that they don't think that there's any chance that she's in the Sea of Abaco right now.
That changes everything.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, it changes the search for physical evidence. You know, Ashley Banfield was on the ground today, up and down that area that that resort, bar, pool that they were frequenting. And she reported, contrary to my initial suspicions, that there were quite a few security cameras. So all of these basic blocking and tackling of this type of investigation are going to be taking place now. Security camera footage. Does this corroborate or contradict statements that Brian Hooker has given multiple hours now of statements to law enforcement? And are the things that he's telling them true or not? Right. And that's going to make this go one step at a time, brick by brick, build the investigation and potentially a case against him.
You know, and it's not just the statements that he's made on camera in these kind of odd interviews when his wife is missing, but it's also what's been revealed by his stepdaughter, Carly Aylesworth, who I spoke with. She details a history of abuse according to her account and what she's witnessed, and her stepsister. But, she also received a couple voicemails from him after her mom went missing. I have one of them, and this is also key evidence that authorities are listening to and taking into account as they investigate this case.
So, honey, I just got a call from Hopetown Search and Rescue, and they have found a flotation device that I threw to Mom when she fell overboard. And they haven't found her yet, but they can now focus all of their efforts in a smaller area.
On Wednesday, Brian releasing a statement on Facebook, writing in part, "I'm heartbroken over the recent boat accident that caused my beloved Lynette to fall from our small dinghy. Despite desperate attempts to reach her, the winds and currents drove us further apart."
So that's exactly what you were talking about in that Facebook message. But I mean, this really throws the whole timeline off. This throws this, if in fact she could not even be in that body of water, and if the search is now focused on land, I mean, that right there shows you that this was somehow possibly premeditated, and that he concealed his actions afterwards. And, I mean, he made up a story to buy himself time, perhaps, if that's the case.
Yeah. And let's keep in mind that, none of this information is 100% confirmed. We're dealing with a crime scene that's the ocean. Okay. So, And does that shift now, right? They've processed the soulmate, the 55-foot sailboat. They've processed the dinghy for physical evidence. They're now going to be backtracking their movements, following the path that they took to see if there's any other digital video evidence, any interviews that could take place with resort staff. And now that search with those cadaver dogs. And I did learn something interesting today, that these dogs have the ability to smell a decomposing body up to 30 feet underwater. Okay, which, in Abaco, that the depth in the Sea of Abaco only gets to about 15 feet in the area that he said Lynette was lost in. So apparently, as that decomposition happens, things will come to the surface that the dogs can pick up on. So, I think when you're hearing anecdotally off the record comments coming from these law enforcement officials that are involved with the search, that they say that they don't believe she's in that body of water, I think that's going to shift this investigation over the coming days.
Yeah, and sadly, we already know that the Coast Guard and others have shifted this from a search and rescue to recovery. That happened a couple of days ago. So what do you imagine is happening right now with what we know and what we don't know? What do you expect that search to look like if you were there?
Yeah, I mean, hey, this search these types of searches are incredibly labor intensive. There's only a certain amount of time that these dogs can be active. It's very manpower intensive. So they're trying to plan the locations that they're focusing on based on the best evidence that they have, because they have a limited amount of resources. So that's that actual physical search that's taking place. There's definitely a second piece of this investigation that's coming together, which is going to be to corroborate or confirm, was Lynette really making plans to go home? Was this relationship on the rocks? Were there financial issues? What was this history of abuse? All of that is going to be happening in a second channel at the same time, to build basically was there a motive here?
And then I go back to my question, why is it that they let him leave? I guess clearly they didn't have enough to charge him after he was detained for a number of days. And then what does that look like for extradition back when we're dealing with the Bahamas?
Well, you do have United States law enforcement officials through the Coast Guard involved in this. certainly there's well-established, legal standards to deal with this between the Bahamas and the United States. What I will say is, at the end of the day, Brian Hooker is innocent until proven guilty in the court of law, right? So in the court of public opinion, his story may not be well received. However, for that to stand up in an actual courtroom, there needs to be enough probative physical evidence to bring this case forward. And as it stands right now, we know that there isn't. We do know that a lot of effort is going into making that happen to confirm. And listen, they're not out there just to go after Brian Hooker, right? These law enforcement officials are trying to find the truth of what happened to Lynette. And that's important for everybody to remember.
What are you watching for now in this part of this investigation as we enter almost 2 weeks?
I think in the coming days and call it weeks, that we are going to, what I'm hoping is that we're going to be able to recover Lynette's body, that these searches will bear fruit. The second piece that I think will start to bubble to the surface is going to be some of that background data. What was really going on in their relationship? What else had been shared to family and friends? Was Lynette really planning on coming home and breaking it off with Brian? And if we can start to confirm some of those things, I think that there's going to be a much clearer picture.
And there might be a big break in the case this weekend. Brian Fitzgibbons, thank you so much for what you do and also for taking the time to talk to us. I know that you're very busy, Director of Operations at USPA Nationwide Security, expert in security, locating missing people, extradition of missing people around the globe. And you're an all-around great guy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Now, I want to switch gears and talk about something uncomfortable. The fact that Lynette might not be with us anymore. It's a reality because the search teams, including the U.S. Coast Guard, are no longer searching for a living person. They switched it to a recovery effort. So what does that mean in terms of recovering her body, if it can be found, and if there is evidence still on her body, if this is a criminal act? I have a very special guest to help us understand. Okay, so joining in the conversation, a good friend of the true crime community, one of my friends, Joseph Scott Morgan, professor of forensics at Jacksonville State University, and also the podcast host of Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Thank you for joining in this discussion. Of course, our thoughts and prayers are with Lynette and her family, but as the time ticks, it's been more than a week. What are your thoughts with the investigation and the likelihood with surrounding the evidence in the case?
It's going to be, a lot of the evidence is going to be circumstantial, Matt. And so if one of the things that we have to think about in this particular is that all we have left are these vessels, and what can the vessels provide? As a forensics guy, my biggest thought is always about security of whether it's a structure, dwelling, or a car or a vessel like this, where we have, obviously the boat, the original boat, and also the dinghy. I want to know what kind of evidentiary value both of those are going to have, and have they been secured to the point where they can be examined. And the field is wide open here regarding what we would be looking for, because looking for a needle in a haystack, this is not the best environment. You're in a marine environment, which are very difficult cases to work. The circumstances that we've heard about were very chaotic. Waters, storms, this sort of thing. And then of course the missing key. And you're right, the longer the clock ticks, the more difficult this is to kind of begin to understand and frame. So that's going to be a problem moving forward for anybody that's investigating this case. I hate it for the family that they're in kind of an isolated spot. And it's a lonely spot to be in. I've covered many of these cases involving where family members are just kind of cast adrift. I'm truly hoping, just like with the young man that we lost recently in Barcelona, I'm hoping that the FBI will step in and put their shoulder to the stone, if you will, and really help out with this case. And first we want to make sure that we could find her. We would love for that to happen, but from an investigative standpoint, everything's got to be locked down, secured, and processed by people that know what they're doing.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we do know from the U.S. Coast Guard that are their boots on the ground, so to speak, and they're helping in the search for this missing American in the Bahamas. But we know that it's gone from a search and rescue to recovery mode. And also family members have come to the realization the likelihood of her survival at this point in time is slim to none. I spoke with daughter Carly Aylesworth not too long ago, and she started a GoFundMe, which I'll share. But, part of it is, to help get her there to help search, but then also for burial costs, because she's actually come to that realization. So if we are looking for a body, and it is in a body of water, what does that look like in terms of actually finding her, and then also still having some sort of evidence on her body?
Yeah, very difficult. And this is why. This is not like looking for a body in a lake or even a river, okay? Or even in a swamp area. You're talking about the Caribbean, and in addition to that, by extension, the Atlantic, okay? And it's a very austere environment. It's very, very harsh. And I don't want to be disrespectful or too graphic, but, started my career in New Orleans, so I was around the Gulf of Mexico a lot and worked a lot of cases there. When you're doing recovery of human remains, they quickly, and because of tidal, push and pull, and not to mention the aquatic life that is there, the marine life, evidence gets compromised really quickly, it degrades quickly. So if you're looking for specific physical evidence, that's going to be very difficult. And again, forgive me, I'm not trying to be absent of hope here, but we're talking about recovery. One of the tough things you have to do in a post-mortem circumstance is you have to separate ante-mortem injuries, which means before death, and post-mortem injuries, or we would really call them insults to the body. Okay, like what happened to the body, after it's been in this aquatic environment and the subject is deceased, because the body reacts completely differently. And you have to have a keen eye here from a forensics perspective to really kind of evaluate these two separate presentations. You don't want to draw any quick conclusions here, because the tiniest little thing, Matt, can turn a case like this.
In a body of water like that, the Bahamas, how does that work? I mean, if someone is deceased, are they likely to float, or are they likely to sink?
With the dead, what will happen is you will have a sinking period where bodies will go subsurface. And as the body begins to change through decomposition, gas builds up, and the bodies literally rise to the top at that point in time. The big thing that you have to fight here, and this is just a harsh reality, is the fact that you've got one of the apex predators on the face of the earth that swims in those waters. And I'm talking about all manner of sharks that are out there and other marine life as well. But you're having to fight with that as well if you're part of the recovery operation. So they have to have a keen eye, the searchers do. And then the people that put their hands on a subject to be recovered have to know what they're doing. It's not just a matter of just pulling a human remain into a boat, okay? It's also a matter of taking care of the body from the perspective that body at that point in time becomes the biggest piece of evidence that you have. So, you have to be trained at what you're doing. You have to pay attention to detail because the devil always indwells therein.
Yeah, and I share with you the sympathy for the family, and if they're in my prayers, if there's hope, I really
Right.
hope that she's still
Absolutely.
alive.
Me too.
But my mind goes to the investigation and what's next, right?
Yeah.
Because there's also reporting now that he was detained, Brian, the husband, who was detained for questioning. He was questioned a few times. They didn't charge him officially, and now he's out.
Right.
He has decided to leave the Bahamas. That's the news of right now of doing this interview. And when I did speak with the daughter, his stepdaughter, I spoke with Carly. She made allegations that there had been abuse witnessed by herself and others in the past, physical abuse. So if we are dealing with a situation where there was physical altercation before she went into the water, Lynette went into the water, would there still be any of that evidence on her person if she's recovered?
That is heavily dependent upon how quickly her remains can be recovered, because you go to this factor of degrading that occurs. So let's just say, for instance, that you have any subject out there that is struck. Okay, maybe they're struck in the jaw. They've been grabbed by the throat. There's bruises on the arms. Okay, well, if they're subject to this marine environment, and particularly the marine life that dwells therein, that evidence can be gone. And I'm trying to be very delicate with how I say this. Okay, people can draw their own conclusions by what I'm saying. But when I say that, we go to the Caribbean, right? We look out over that beautiful water, right? And I don't think people understand how treacherous it really is. It is a very austere environment. You don't think of that, when you see that beautiful water, but it is. And the dead don't do well in it. Don't do well in it at all. I hope that they find her. I hope that they can recover her intact, because I'm like everybody else. I've been watching this case, and I'm hoping that we'll have some answers, right? Maybe she had some kind of medical difficulty. We'll be able to understand, I think, if a thorough examination is done, is not she drowned or not, or if there is some kind of physical manifestation that's left behind on her that could have been lethal or could have led to a life-ending event. That could be appreciated too. So, but again, time is the factor. Just like when you're looking for a living subject, with the dead, from an investigative and evidentiary standpoint, time is critical as well.
What questions do you have, and what are you watching for?
Well, I'm at the top of my list, aside from this sweet lady's body, or her, those vessels. I just so desperately want to make sure that they're secured so that they can be thoroughly examined. And then probably any kind of interview information that comes up with people that may have seen them at some point in time. That's the heart of an investigation when you go to any kind of circumstantial information that manifests itself, where you can kind of stitch all that stuff together and you begin to understand the narrative at large. And that's going to be critical. But the vessels themselves, I want to try to understand this dynamic, because I think you'll admit it's very confusing. The whole set of circumstances. I think that's why people are so very interested in this case, because the story is very confusing. And so I want to try to understand that. And is there something, a physical manifestation on either one of those vessels? Is there a mechanical issue? Is there anything there that might have evidentiary trace evidence, any kind of value? And I'm talking about stuff that is so delicate that you would have to look for anything, obviously dealing with blood, hair, any scratches or scrapes on the interior of this dinghy that is out of the norm, and has anything been altered on the surface? Was there an attempt to clean anything? All these sorts of things. As an investigator, when you come into it blind, you're kind of very broad spectrum, right? And you have to consider all of this, because if you don't, you can't unring the bell at that point, Matt. You have to do it early on, and you have to press.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you're familiar with water investigations as well, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
I haven't covered too many cases to deal with water, to be honest with you, other than, at missing persons where it was a swimmer and they went missing. But I guess to your point, you made me think of, he's making allegations that he threw like a life preserver or something to her. Well, that better be missing from the dinghy, right? Things like that.
Yeah. And you have to, I was involved in a documentary a couple of years back on HBO dealing with Natalie Wood. And that's one of the biggest mysteries ever, all right, in true crime, right? And still to this day, everybody has questions about that case. And one of the reasons it's so very confusing is it's so out of the norm. You were mentioning you don't cover, a lot of cases like this, and you don't. I mean, there's not a lot of stuff that happens that occurs on vessels, not to the degree, that we get, cases that occur on the street in some big city or some suburban neighborhood. So it's a very specialized kind of investigation. And you would want to look for things that might be absent or altered in there. You're talking about a life preserver, a life ring, those sorts of things. Does that marry up with with what you would expect to find there, what they would have access to? And then how is it utilized? Because, if I'm interviewing somebody, I'm going to ask the same question probably about 5 or 6 different ways. Okay. I just want to make sure that I have it right so that I understand what they're saying. And particularly something like this that is so intricately detailed. I want to make sure that I'm hearing the same thing over and over again from a different perspective every time I ask that question. The Bahamian police arrested and released, or detained, and I won't say arrested, and released. Okay. That's why, I like to have, our colleagues at the FBI, step in, because there's an FBI presence at every consulate, around the world. All right. That's why they're there, to help U.S. citizens. And if there's something that happens, I like for them to be there, Johnny on the spot. And that way we're represented. Our people are represented, when we go abroad. Again, I refer back to the situation in Barcelona. I still have questions about that case, the way it was handled, that sort of thing. And I'd urged early on, that our consulate, the representatives from the FBI there, should have been attached to that case and following along, because people, it's tough enough, when you're in a foreign country, but how much more so when you have a loved one that's gone missing? That's the ultimate nightmare scenario for many people.
Well, I certainly appreciate your time. How do we get a hold of you? And I know you have your podcast.
Yeah, so Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan is on all platforms, iHeart, Apple, Spotify. And I now have a YouTube channel. Sticking my toe into those waters, if you will. It's scary, but it's been, we've had it up for about a month, and we've got about 7,000 subscribers already. And so all the old episodes have been posted up. Now we're about to go to video. So, and I've got one of those faces that only a mother could love. So we'll see how that works out from the videography standpoint. But I'm kind of excited about that. And of course, you can catch us at Jacksonville State University and Department of Forensic Investigations, where I'm the Distinguished Scholar of Applied Forensics.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I'll put the link in the show notes below. Make sure that everyone hits the subscribe button, and I'm sure the YouTube is going to be great. I'm new to YouTube as well. It is a vast, scary thing that I haven't done before, but I'm right there with you. And I'm sure we'll both see each other at CrimeCon as well.
I am super excited. That's just in a couple of more weeks. I can't wait to see you, and maybe we can have a cup of coffee.
Absolutely. Thank you. Again, I want to keep Lynette's family and friends in our thoughts and prayers. I'll keep you updated on this case, so please hit the like and subscribe and share this episode with a friend. In the meantime, take care of yourself. We'll see you next time.